refuah shleimah for Yankel Benish, Ben Frida, and for all the cholim of Klal Yisrael. Anyone else?
No.
Okay, so just one in Parashat Matos, because it's a double parsha this week, Matot Maseh, which finishes off the book of Bamidbar before we start the parak. So one of the things is that the Jews were ordered to go and wipe out the Midianites, and because of the incident with Cosby and Zimri, where Pinchas stopped the plague by killing both of them, and when they wiped them out, they wiped out the people that enticed the Jewish men to succumb to the Midianite woman. They didn't wipe out the women that weren't involved, so they took them as property, and they also took their vessels, and the vessels, they had to kasher the vessels. So the one important law of kashrut is learned from this parsha, is that if vessels were used where heat was applied, as in cooking, you have to kasher it in that way to purge it of the flavor that was embedded, or the food that was embedded in the wall of the vessel. So that's where it comes from in terms of kashering a non-kosher vessel. Depending on if it was used for cooking, then you apply heat to it to kasher it.
Okay. Interesting.
That's it.
Okay. So in other words, you're saying the exact method that made it tray is the same method you have to use to make it kosher. Is that
purge it? They use the word purge of
yeah. But that's what I'm talking about, methodology rectification.
Yeah, exactly. But the same way. Same way.
Okay.
So.
All right, guys. Let me just tell you what we're going through. There are two different brises. There's one in Bava Kamma in 65, the 65th daf, and there's a brise in the 106th daf in Aleph. And it was taught if a custodian swore falsely that the deposit was stolen, and witnesses testified that he himself stole it, and then he also confessed his guilt, he's liable only to the kefil payment. So again, he swore falsely that he stole it. Sorry, he swore falsely that it was stolen from him, and then witnesses testified that he himself stole it, and then he came right and confessed and admitted. He's only liable to the kefil payment, but not the one for surcharge, despite his confession to having made a false oath. Okay. Now, the Gemara inquires about the specifics of the exemption of the one for surcharge. And as we learned yesterday, well, we learned this not only yesterday, but before, in Bamidbar, Numbers chapter 5, verse 7, he shall make restitution for his guilt in its principal amount and add its fifth to it, which implies that the fifth is added only when the principal amount alone is paid, but not when a twofold payment is made. Okay. Now, Rashi's commentary is that Rav Yaakov explains that the custodian is actually liable to both kefil and a fifth. Why for the kefil? Because witnesses came against him, and you pay the kefil if your admittance didn't come before the witnesses. And since he did admit to it, we do allow the 1/5 to be worked within the kefil. What do we mean? I mean, guys, if you're paying, if you have to pay 100, if you have to pay 100 zuz worth, we worked out that the kefil is 1/5 of the 20, and the 80 is the principal amount. So it works from the total. It works from the total amount. Otherwise, it would end up being only 15 zuz. Okay. So we asked if it was in or outer. But besides from that, since you're paying double with the kefil, it more than compensates for the 1/5 surcharge. But we allow that in order to have that atonement aspect apart from the Asham offering. That's according to Rav Yaakov. But that exemption applies in somewhat limited circumstances. I'm not going to go through back into the 65th daf, but not everybody is of that opinion. So Rami Bava Kamma inquired, is the precise reason for the exemption that any money which makes one liable to the careful payment exempts him from the one for surcharge for that same money? Or perhaps the precise reason is that any oath which makes one liable to the careful payment exempts him from the one for surcharge for that oath. So you say, okay, so what's the difference? Potatoes, potatoes, tomatoes, tomatoes. Like, what's the difference? I mean, at the end of the day, like if you look at it, so say somebody plotted a month to hit you at the back of the car, or they weren't watching, they were on their cell phone and hit you at the back of the car. Either way, what's the difference? They hit you at the back of the car. The car needs to be repaired. Well, the difference is, in certain cases, particularly homicide, is that motive does make a difference. It's not just the outcome of the death. So we're saying here, what is the rationale? Is it about making multiple false oaths, or is it about the fact that when you're dealing with one single amount, is that the issue that you can't have multiple payments? So I'm going to go through a case relevancy. You're dealing with a case where there's an unpaid custodian that claimed a claim of theft by thief and swore to that effect, and he later claimed a claim of loss and swore to that effect. Okay, so and then witnesses came and testified regarding the first oath that it was false, and then he admitted regarding the second oath that it was false. Okay, so we want to know, what is the law? Is he liable to the one for surcharge on account of the second oath? Because he himself admitted that. And we want to know, in addition, is there a careful payment on account of the first oath or not? So just going to give you a little bit of clarity. So that when the Torah teaches that one can't be held liable to both the twofold payment and the one for surcharge in a single case, does it mean that dual charges cannot be incurred for the denial of the same money? Okay. In other words, when we're dealing with the same money, is that a case like a single deposit? That means you can't have dual charges of a careful and a fit, even if the actions, because we're dealing with the same deposit. Or perhaps we say that dual charges can't be incurred for the same false oath. So, as the Gemara is explaining from this case, it bears on a case where the defendant made two false oaths in denial of the same money. So, guys, that's the bottom line in terms of the case. If you want to give it over to me, it's two false oaths in denial of the same money. So, does the exemption apply because there was only one claim, or does it not apply because there were two false oaths? Okay. So Tosfot explains that he retracted his original claim and swore from the outset that the deposit had been lost rather than stolen. There are other Meforshim that explained that he was actually sued by the plaintiff in different courts. And instead of repeating the same claim of theft, now advances a claim of loss. Okay. So, again, the case, first oath, witnesses come and testified that his first oath was false and that he himself took the item. Then he admitted regarding the second oath afterwards that it was false, whether he felt bad or not. There weren't witnesses to the second. So regarding the second oath, do we say that there's a one for surcharge, and in the first oath, careful payment on account of the witnesses against him? So the Gemara explains it like this. Do we say that any money which makes one liable to the careful payment exempts him from paying the one for surcharge for that same money? And regarding this money that the custodian denied, he already became liable to the careful payment over it through his first oath, so he cannot also become liable to the one for surcharge over it through the second oath, because it's the same amount of money, same deposit, same value. Or, that's one way of looking at it, perhaps we can say that an oath which makes one liable to the careful payment that exempts him from paying the one for surcharge for that same oath. Okay? So if the defendant would confess that his first oath, sorry, guys, I'm getting my tongue twisted here. So if the defendant is going to confess that his first oath was false, he couldn't be held liable to the one for surcharge for that oath, since he's already liable to kefil on account of it. So what we are saying is, the first oath, he is liable to the kefil. Why would he be liable to the kefil? Why do you pay kefil, Kevin?
It's a punishment. It's not a punishment. What's the word?
It is a punishment. It's a penalty. Absolutely.
Penalty for denying, for misleading and denying the appropriation of the item, and or actually even or taking the or illegally
Correct.
acquiring the item.
Correct. So Kevin said two important things, and I like that distinction. He's saying, as far as a custodian is concerned, the penalty is actually for the false oath that you claimed that somebody stole it from you when you in fact stole it, and witnesses come against you and prove evidentially you've got in your possession. The second reason for having a penalty of a kefil, which is the principal plus the penalty, is the same amount as the principal, so you're paying double basically. And as far as that's concerned, we're a thief doesn't even have to make a false oath. It's like if he comes right and he admits to his guilt and he says, listen, I've got this item, I'm returning it, or I'm giving the cash equivalent, he doesn't bother the court, absolutely fine. If the witnesses that testify against him and is apprehended, but he doesn't admit to it, it's too late to admit to it after there are witnesses. Why? Because although the kefil amount is within although the one for surcharge is within the kefil amount, at that point you're still liable for the ashram, which costs a fortune. And the reality is, as an actual thief, the whole reason that you're liable is because witnesses came against you and you weren't cleared of your own volition. So what we are saying is, I'm just going to wait for Kevin a second.
No, it's fine. I'm just getting something out the cupboard here. I'm listening. Carry on.
So Kevin, what we are saying is as follows, is that at the end of the day, you lied as a custodian, and that's why you pay the kefil. So how can you lie over that oath, and then all of a sudden the second oath you come right? That's what it's saying, and then expect it ought to be okay. In other words, it's the oath that you made falsely as a custodian that makes one liable to the kefil payment, because witnesses come against him afterwards, and therefore it exempts him from paying one for surcharge for the same oath. Because if the higher level of teshuvah is not to admit it once witnesses come against you, but there is still that one for surcharge in the ashram that's put within that kefil, simply because there was a admittance after witnesses. It's not the highest madrega, but it's certainly a better level than denying it flatly. So if the defendant would confess that his first oath was false, he could not be held liable to the one for surcharge for that oath. Meant he was already liable to kefil on account of witnesses coming against him. But if you look at the latter oath, where he admitted himself, you could say it's a case where the guy was dragged to a different court. Since it didn't make him liable to the kefil payment out of his own admittance, there were no witnesses, it makes him liable to the one for surcharge opportunity and ashram offering for teshuvah, despite the fact that it concerned the same money as the first oath. So the Gemara is basically putting both sides of the coin. Because you might wonder how the defendant can be held liable on all account of the second oath, right? Because why don't we apply the principle that you just charged of your obligation towards the owner with the first oath? The second oath has no weight. So let me explain to you what it means. Is that the first oath, according to Rav Yochanan, you can claim that it was lost it was lost, for example, and then witnesses come against you, and that kind of can exempt you because your oath has to be believed. So in that particular case, why are you even held account for your second oath? Because you're obligated. If you don't hold according to Rav Yochanan, Rashi explains it as the principle that the court can't authorize more than one oath. So if the defendant swears again, it's struck off the roll, and it doesn't have a gravity of a court-imposed oath, but is considered a voluntary oath. So if witnesses testify that the second oath was false, the defendant won't be liable to careful, since the penalty incurred is only through a court-imposed oath. The defendant cannot ever become liable to self-admittance of crime, which is a one for surcharge, and an asham offering, as long as it's a denial of a monetary claim. So Rami Bava Kamma inquires specifically about a case in which witnesses testified about the falsity of the first oath, that the deposit was stolen, and then the defendant confessed to the false nature of the second oath he took. Afterwards, he felt bad that the deposit was lost. So the only possible basis for exempting him from the surcharge for the second oath is that he is really liable to the kefil for the first oath. Now, if we take the reverse case, where he first swore that the deposit was lost and ultimately confessed, and then swore that it was stolen, and then was ultimately contradicted by witnesses, it's clear that he can't be held liable to the kefil for the second oath, because he already discharged his obligation towards the owner with the first oath. So that goes according to Rav Yochanan. So it depends on the order. Is the order false oath about theft, then loss of item, or is it about loss of item through an accident and then theft? Either way, we don't apply both, but we want to know, is the reason because they're two oaths, or is the reason because we're dealing with the same amount of money? Okay, so the Gemara is going to resolve the inquiry. Ravas said, come learn the resolution from the following brisa. It's in Shavuos 49a, and basically it said, if a man said to one in the marketplace, where's my ox that you stole from me? And he says in reply, I didn't steal it. And the owner said, I adjure you that your response is true. And he says, Amen. And afterwards, witnesses testify against him that he did steal it. He pays the twofold payment. Okay? So, in this case where witnesses testified that he stole the ox, the fact that he took an oath is irrelevant, guys. Since an actual thief, we're not talking about a custodian who is apprehended by witnesses, is liable to kefil even if he did not swear, which is what Kevin told us. So well done, Kev. And the brisa mentions that the thief swore falsely only as a prelude to the succeeding case in which he subsequently confessed, according to Rashi. Okay, that's an actual thief. Now, this is the point. He pays the twofold payment because witnesses testify against him. But if witnesses did not come and he admitted on his own that he swore falsely, he pays the principal and one for surcharge and brings an asham offering. Okay. In this case, he doesn't pay the kefil penalty for the theft, since fines are not assessed on the basis of his own admission. Now, I'm going to ask you guys a question. Why we learned that if there was a kefil payment for a thief, why kefil payment is only if the thief doesn't admit that he stole the item and witnesses come against him. Why would the thief have to pay an asham offering and a one for surcharge, guys, if he admitted it?
Because the witnesses already came.
No, then he pays the kefil. So that's a trick question. So what you are dealing with here is two different types of thieves. The one thief comes and says, I stole your item, I'm returning it, or I spent your item and drank the bottle of Shevis Rigo and I'm giving you the cash or replacing it. And he does so of his own volition. The other one is where he comes before witnesses. He hears about town that there are going to be witnesses. So he decides to go to the court and say, listen, I hear people are saying things against me. I'm prepared to take an oath that I didn't take it. and he takes an oath. And then Gavin, he feels rotten a while later, but there's still no witnesses that have come against him for this matter. And he then decides to become clean of his own admittance. So since witnesses didn't come against him, he still has to have atonement for his false oath, and therefore the one for surcharge goes to the owner in addition to the principal and the Hashem offering to Hashem for the actual thief. You get it? It depends at what, if he has a false oath or not, basically. Okay? So, right, as far as that's concerned, but if witnesses did not come and he admitted on his own that he had sworn falsely, he pays the principal and the one for surcharge and brings the Hashem offering to Hashem. Now here in the latter case, if witnesses had come prior to his admission, it is the witnesses who would have made him liable to the kefil payment, the twofold payment, but dint of their testimony about the theft itself, even if he had not sworn falsely. Nevertheless, the Brisa states that if he admitted on his own, without witnesses having come, yes, he's liable to pay the one for surcharge if he made a false oath. If he admitted it on his own before making a false oath of denial, he only has to return the principal. But if he admitted to having sworn falsely after witnesses testified that he stole, he's not liable to pay the one for the surcharge. Okay? Because when witnesses comes before admits, they render him liable to kefil, and his liable to kefil exempts him from the liability of one for surcharge on account of his subsequent admission. So what we're saying is it's covered within the kefil, okay? So, but we want to know, is it because you can't have multiple oaths, and that's where the exemption comes from, or because we're dealing with the same amount of money? Okay. Now, the Gemara says, if it should enter your mind that it's only an oath which makes him liable to the kefil payment, and that exempts him from paying the 1/5 surcharge for that same oath, but the defendant can become liable to both. Just hang on a second, guys. Is Arthur still with us?
He's with his thing, is with his client. That's fine.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's
it says 4 participants. It does say his camera must be off.
yeah. Okay, no, that's fine as long as his
camera is completely off. I can see you on the side there.
Okay, no, because it's just
he's
okay.
definitely connected. He's
Okay.
working. He must have the headsets on so he can hear us.
Okay. All right. So that's not a problem. So basically, if it should enter your mind that the only an oath which makes one liable to the kefil payment that exempts him from paying the one for surcharge for that same oath, but the defendant can become liable to both kefil and 1/5 over the same money, then why, when he admits that after the witnesses testify, does he not pay the 1/5 surcharge? Okay? Do you understand the question, guys, or not?
Well, just repeat the question. I think I do, but just repeat the question.
The Brisa says, if it should enter your mind that it's only an oath which makes one liable to the kefil payment, that exempts him from paying the 1/5 surcharge for that same oath, but a defendant can become liable to both kefil and 1/5 over the same money, then why, when he admits after witnesses testify, does he not pay the 1/5 surcharge? So what it's proposing is, if you're dealing with the same money and you can pay kefil and 1/5, which in this case is the same money, but it's two different oaths, why can't we make him pay the 1/5 surcharge and the kefil in this particular case? Okay. So the Gemara says, let us see. This oath that he declared did not make him liable to the kefil payment, since the witness's testimony about the theft itself is the reason he's liable, guys. So let the oath therefore make him liable to the 1/5 surcharge. Okay, so it's saying maybe you can, if you have more than one oath. The witnesses clapped him on the one, on the other he admitted. Why can't we make him over the same money pay the kefil on where the witnesses caught him out, on the other one where he admitted it of his own volition? So it says, rather do you not learn from this that the money which makes him liable to the kefil payment is what exempts him from the 1/5 surcharge of that money? Okay, so in other words, the dual charges of kefil and the one for surcharge can never be incurred over the same money, even in a case where there is a separate oath. Okay? And it says indeed learn from it. So I'm going to repeat the last sentence and we'll finish on that note. I don't want to hit this other subject. Dual charges of kefil and one for surcharge can never be incurred over the same money, even in a case where there's a separate oath. That's the bottom line. Cool. We learned to
Because the same, yeah, this can't be duplication because it's is it then it's unfair punishment, it's like double punishment, double penalty.
That's not the issue. The issue is if it was different amounts of money and two separate oaths, then there's no problem having a kefil and a 1/5. It's about the fact that you, after arguing on the same amount of money, you can only impose either the kefil or the one for surcharge. You can't do both. Even when they're two separate court situations, even when in the one case he made a case of a deposit being lost, the other case of it being stolen, etc. Over the same amount of money, even if they're two different oaths or two different court trials, you can only have either a kefil or one for surcharge, but not both. That's basically it. The money issue. It's not the double oath issue.
So just repeat that again, please. I'm just trying to.
The Gemara said in the beginning, listen, we don't. It's an absolute pleasure because it's not an easy concept, Kevin, at all. So the Gemara says, look, how basically, you've got a case where a custodian swore falsely that the deposit was stolen, and then witnesses testified that he himself stole it, and he also confessed his guilt. He's liable only to the kefil payment, but not to the one for surcharge. And we're saying, well, how does this case occur? We're saying it's a case where an unpaid custodian claimed a claim of theft by a thief and then swore to that effect, and afterwards he claimed a loss where the sheep was taken by wolf and swore to that effect. And it was two different court cases where the plaintiff took him to two different courts. And the first one, witnesses came against him and testified that the first oath was false. And then he obviously has to pay kefil. And then the second one, he admitted that he has a false oath. He felt bad. And basically, we say, well, why doesn't, when he admitted on his own without witnesses, pay the one for surcharge? So we wanted to know is what is the issue? It could only be a case where it could only be a case where there's one of two issues, and I'm going to explain it simply, not the way the Gemara does. You can't be liable to both the twofold payment and the one for surcharge in a single case. According to Rav Yaakov, the kefil covers the 1/5, but according to another opinion, it technically doesn't. But you can only either be charged the kefil or the 1/5, Kevin. So does it mean that dual charges cannot be incurred for the denial of the same money, or that dual charges cannot be incurred for the same oath? And what we learned here is that dual charges cannot be applied for the same money. It doesn't matter if they're two different oaths and there's two different situations. If you're dealing with the same issue, you can either apply the kefil or the 1/5, but not both. That's what we wanted to know. Is it a case of oath, or is it a case where you're dealing with the monetary issue? Yeah, but that's it. Right, listen, we kept it simple enough. It wasn't easy, but you guys did excellently well, and it's lovely to see you every day.